On January 30th, 1933, Hitler was named Chancellor by the President of Germany, Paul von Hindenburg. From that day on, Hitler started to gain more and more power as a Chancellor and then ran Paul von Hindenburg out of power. When Hitler gained his power, he was determined to gain back all of Germany's power and become the most dominant country in all of Europe. The first thing Hitler wanted to do when he gained power was to get rid of the Treaty of Versailles. By doing this, he got most Germans to support him because everyone really hated the treaty. Then he wanted to unite Germany and have them all speak and have the same view in order to be a united country. This meant getting rid of the people he did not agree with. The last thing he wanted to do was to expand Germany eastward into Poland and Russia to gain land for people to have more living space. To do this, he would have to get rid of Britain and France, and he knew that they would not want to do it, but they also didn't want a relapse of World War I, so they would compromise. These things were all written in his book, Mein Kampf, meaning My Struggle, when he was in prison. To make these three things happen, Nazis installed fear throughout the Jewish communities, threatening them, resulting in many Jewish people leaving. These actions were under the control of Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the elite Nazi guards and then later the chief of German police. The Nazis also publicly burned books of the communist Jews, liberals, and foreigners, all to show people how powerful the Nazis were. Hitler said many things in his book about how he felt about the Jews, including, "No, the Jews have not the creative abilities which are necessary to the founding of civilization. Therefore, the Jewish intellect will never be constructive, but always deconstructive." This is basically saying that the Jewish population does not have the creative ability, which is ideal in the creation of civilization, and meaning they should not live in Germany. For the next 6 years, the Nazis spent their time diminishing Jewish-owned businesses and getting rid of Jewish doctors and lawyers. For the Jews who did not leave out of fear, they began to send them to concentration camp. The first concentration camp, called Dachau, opened in March 1933. Most of the first prisoners were communists, getting rid of his political opponents. To get rid of Britain and France in 1934, Germany and Poland created an alliance which caused a surprise reaction throughout Europe. This alliance broke Germany's diplomatic isolation and also weakened the French's theory of anti-German alliance through Eastern Europe. Poland and Germany had a cordial relationship and were getting along, but Hitler did have a tactical move and had no plan in honoring the agreement for long. In July 1934, Austrian Nazis overthrew the government. After this, Hitler stabilized power and worked on his worldwide view, which was to have racial purity and the expansion of his view throughout the world. This started in 1933 when Hitler combined those things to form a driving force behind the foreign and domestic policy to gain more and more land and power. In 1936, there was still a part of Germany that was demilitarized. During this time, Hitler was rearming his army, and Britain and France knew, and it was against the Treaty of Versailles, but they let him do it anyway. Hitler then invaded the Rhineland on March 7th, and Germany was completely free from the Treaty of Versailles. In 1938, Germany took over Austria and united the German people there, making him very popular. Everyone then thought Hitler's next move was going to be to invade Poland, but instead Hitler wanted to go for the Sudetenland. The British Prime Minister, who wanted to keep peace, made an appeasement with Hitler and gave him the land in exchange for peace. On September 30th, 1938, Hitler had signed the Munich Pact with the French, British, and Mussolini. The original agreement was that Hitler was only supposed to get the Sudetenland in part of Czechoslovakia, where 3 million Germans lived. They also gave over to the Nazis 66% of Czechoslovakia's coal, 70% of their iron and steel, 70% of its electrical power, and more. By taking away basically all of Czechoslovakia's natural resources and their electrical power, it left Czechoslovakia in a vulnerable place. By gaining part of Czechoslovakia, Hitler was able to then take over all of Czechoslovakia and have full German domination of the country. Then on March 15, 1939, Hitler threatened Czech President Emil Hácha, saying that there was going to be a bombing raid against Prague unless the Germans could use Hácha as a passageway for German troops in the borders of Czechoslovakia. The Munich Pact ended up being just part of Hitler's plan to use the pact to his advantage. In September 1939, the German army was in the western half of Poland. They started to take over. Hitler had German police take the streets to raid the Jews and force tens of thousands of Jewish people to leave their homes and go to ghettos and live in a confined space with other Jewish people. The ghettos were surrounded with high walls and barbed wire so no one could get out. They were more like captive city-states than a new home for Jews. These places were packed and overpopulated with widespread unemployment, hunger, and poverty, which led to breeding grounds for many diseases like typhus. In the fall of 1939, Nazis selected about 70,000 Germans that needed to be institutionalized for things like mental illnesses or disabilities, and he gassed them. To do this, he called it an anesthesia program, which was supposed to be putting them to sleep, but really he was gassing them, and he made it seem like he was doing something to help them. And then by 1945, he had killed over 275,000 people that were handicapped. To be able to tell a lie this big like Hitler did, Hitler explained in his book, Mein Kampf, to be able to tell a lie this big, you have to tell it frequently enough for people to believe it. Hitler is basically saying that the more and more you lie about something, the more believable it will become. He did this with thousands and millions of people. And then, lastly, in May of 1940, the Second War had begun, and Britain and France were waiting for an attack from Germany, but it never came, resulting in them getting tricked by Hitler and it being called the Phony War. After this, France was waiting to be attacked by Germany and decided to create a wall along the border. But Germany then found a gap in the system in the woods where they got through and started attacking Germany. Britain then sent its 340,000 troops home, and when Hitler stopped attacking, the French surrendered on June 16th. At this point, Hitler was more powerful than he had ever been, and it wasn't going to stop there. All these things that Hitler did were in order to help his plan succeed. That was written in his book, from getting rid of the Treaty of Versailles to creating treaties and pacts with other countries. They were all just stepping stones for his master plan to try and take over the world.